Florence, the city of Dante, Da Vinci, and Machiavelli. In the early modern period, it developed into one of the major urban centers of the world. It became the nexus of a commercial revolution, leading to the rise of finance as an institution. It was the home of Da Vinci, the progenitor of the Renaissance, and in former times was the birthplace of Dante, the supreme poet and one of history's great spiritual thinkers. At its apogee, it commanded an empire of loans, artists, and alliances. It became so prominent that Machiavelli himself felt the city had the destiny to unify Italy. The Medicis, patrons of the arts, devout Catholics, and brutal political realists, ruled the city during its most impactful period. Florence was a true republic. Its landed nobles had been banned from holding office, a measure that empowered the populace. The city's office holders served for short terms and were elected through sortition, a kind of lottery. In practice, wealth dominated the system. The most affluent families, usually merchants, were able to purchase the most goodwill through patronage and the funding of subordinates. This translated into power in Florentine politics. Though the Medicis never acquired a formal title of leadership, they came to dominate the city from behind the scenes. Cosimo de' Medici, in the 15th century, is a progenitor of the dynasty. His father Giovanni had founded the Medici Bank, using the wealth garnered from owning two wool workshops to finance it. Money lending was technically illegal in Europe, banned by the canon law of the church as usury. In the medieval period, using money to make money was viewed as immoral. It wasn't seen as a necessary function to keep money in circulation or for investment in the economy. As the late Middle Ages proceeded, families like the Medici found ways against the restrictions on interest by charging fees. Similar to modern banks, fees allowed them to charge de facto interest rates. Following a complicated schedule, these fees had all the function of interest without formally charging it. The Medicis pioneered several innovations in finance. They developed a modern system of credits and debits, or income and expenses, and met their clients on benches or bancas, the Italian word becoming the basis for our word bank. A product of his father's fastidious work, Cosimo inherited a substantial fortune from him, entering adulthood as one of the wealthiest people in Europe. Following the Florentine branch, the bank expanded to Rome, Venice, Lyon, Bruges, and London, with its office at the Vatican bringing in the largest amount of income. The Medici Bank diversified, purchasing interests in wool, silk, and shipbuilding. Cosimo proved the most adept of the Medicis at business, leaving a strong legacy in the bank for his family. He set the precedent of the house investing their wealth in art and culture, spending 600,000 florins, or $500 million in today's money, on patronage. Cosimo maintained the unique ethos of the Medici. Allowing the republican system of Florence to function, he amassed power indirectly, using his wealth to cultivate favor throughout the state, financing employment for officials throughout the city. Piero de' Medici, Cosimo's son, was a less able administrator and suffered from lifelong gout. He was so disabled he was forced to delegate most operations of the bank to subordinates, though it continued to expand under his leadership. The Medici would reach their apogee under Piero's son Lorenzo, known to history as the Magnificent. Inheriting the bank during its period of greatest strength, he sought to leverage it to his family's advantage. Rather than focus on business, Lorenzo used the bank's position for political and artistic clout. Becoming less discerning of who to lend money to, he sought out high-profile clients like the King of England and the Duke of Burgundy. Lorenzo used his dynasty's funds to patron the great artists of the Renaissance, sponsoring figures like Michelangelo, Botticelli, Raphael, and others. Lorenzo also began to compile books, a symbol of his family's stature, competing with the Pope and Matthias Corvinus of Hungary to hoard the largest library in Europe. While Lorenzo's practices made his family more prestigious, the poor loans made by the family came at a price. Discipline over the bank declined, and incompetent subordinates were given control of its branches. Managers like Tommaso Portinari were empowered. Though Portinari was of the same family of the famous Beatrice Dante was devoted to, he managed the affairs of the Bruges branch of the bank poorly. The London branch also lost thousands of florins, lending to Edward IV, the English king during the War of the Roses, and Charles the Bold, who died prematurely when invading Switzerland. Lorenzo's greatest accomplishment was as a diplomat. He played an instrumental role in the creation of the Italian League, an alliance between Florence, Milan, Venice, the Papal States, and Naples. Developing after the wars between Venice and Milan in the 1440s, the alliance established a general peace in the Italian peninsula. Without war between the city-states, Italy's polities were able to flourish internally. This led to the economic and artistic revolution of the Renaissance. Thus, we can credit Lorenzo's politics for this revolution in human thought. Previously, in the era of Dante, Italy had been divided between two factions: the Ghibellines, who were loyal to the Holy Roman Empire, and the Guelphs, who sought independence from it. Despite the short-term successes of Frederick Barbarossa, the Italians eventually prevailed in breaking free of imperial rule. The Guelphs then divided between the black and white Guelphs, the blacks accepting the supremacy of the Pope, and the whites' independence from the domineering and newly empowered papacy. Dante himself belonged to the latter. Yet with the empire expelled from the peninsula, the city-states of Italy now became responsible for their own defense. This made them vulnerable to intervention by foreign powers like France and Spain. Thus, beyond maintaining peace, which it did for 40 years, Lorenzo's alliance also existed to keep outsiders out of Italy. Machiavelli felt the greatest possibility of Italian unification lied under the leadership of the Medici. Had Lorenzo lived, the Medici bank remained solvent, and the city-states unified, it's possible the alliance could have transitioned into a long-term institutional structure, turning into a kind of federation which, under the guidance of the Medici, might have transformed into a prototype of a united Italy. In 1468, Giuliano, brother of Lorenzo, participated in a joust, winning against his rivals. During the competition, he named Lucrezia Donati as his lady, and in his victory, demonstrated the Medici's legitimacy and primacy as the rulers of Florence. Yet this spectacle provoked the envy of the Pazzis, one of the rival families of Florence. The Pazzis were an ancient landed dynasty, their aristocratic heritage excluding them from participation in politics. Similar to Cosimo, their patriarch was Andrea de' Pazzi, who founded his own bank in imitation of the Medici. The Pazzis had a noble reputation, and as the second most powerful house in Florence, presented themselves as an alternative for leadership of the state. Assessing the public's view of the Medici was complex. At times their popularity waned, and their success provoked envy or enmity. As the city's de facto rulers, they maintained employment and stability in Florence, for example by maintaining its imports of English wool, which kept the textile industry working. Yet whenever employment fluctuated or other problems arose, people would voice their criticism of the family. While hereditary powers like the Pazzi were traditionally banned from office, changes to the Florentine constitution had allowed them to assume positions in government. Identifying the public's grievances with the Medici, they perceived an opportunity to supplant them. They found support in Pope Sixtus IV, King Ferrante of Naples, and Francesco Salviati of Pisa, who had also grown resentful of Medici prominence. With their backing, the Pazzi developed a conspiracy. Hoping to capitalize on popular criticism of the Medici, the plan was for Francesco de' Pazzi and his ally Bernardo Bandini to ambush the Medicis in the Florence Cathedral during Sunday Mass. The Archbishop would then sing the Palazzo or government center, and proclaim a new government with the Pazis in power. As often happens in such situations, and as Machiavelli rightly acknowledges in The Prince, the difficulties of conspirators are immense. During the attack in 1478, the young and able-bodied Giuliano de' Medici, Lorenzo's vital younger brother, was stabbed to death. Intervention by the crowd, however, and poor execution resulted in Lorenzo being wounded but able to escape the attack. Here the Pazis made a mistake similar to the conspirators who killed Caesar. They ran through the streets making cries of liberty, thinking the people would turn out in their favor. Rather than rally the public around them, however, the people turned on the Pazis and became the Medici's best supporters. With Lorenzo alive, Medici power in Florence held on, and the populace sought retribution, the people turning into the family's enforcers. They became violently hostile to the Pazzi, and even hunted down the archbishop who supported them, executing him. Francesco and Bandini were hanged publicly from the Palazzo, Da Vinci even drawing a sketch of Bandini. The Pope proceeded to excommunicate Lorenzo due to the execution of the archbishop, and with the support of Naples, threatened war. However, in 1479, Lorenzo traveled to Naples, and with his characteristic diplomatic guile, was able to negotiate the Neapolitan exit from the war. This isolated the Pope, who was forced to compromise and proclaim peace. While Florence remained a republic after 1480, in practice the government became more authoritarian, with power consolidated in the hands of Lorenzo. Stability was restored, the economy recovered, and Florence witnessed a renewed flourishing of the arts. Lorenzo suffered from poor health like his father, however, and died prematurely in 1492 at the age of 43. He had been suffering from gout like Piero, as well as tuberculosis. His early death meant that his delicately balanced diplomacy was over, and with increasing tension among the Allies, the Italian League came to an end. In Milan and Naples, succession crises developed, resulting in the French invasion of Italy to install personal unions, beginning the bloody sequence of conflicts known as the Italian Wars. These wars would be famous for their rapidly shifting alliances based on self-interest. This conflict would be so destructive, however, that it would result in the end of the Renaissance and the golden age of the city-states. Meanwhile, the Medici Bank, with its loans having become increasingly poor in quality, became insolvent. While the Medici did keep about 5% of their depositors' funds in the bank, out of pride they refused to lower interest rates for depositors until it was too late. This meant by the time of the French invasion of Florence in 1494, the bank had come under too much duress and collapsed. After the French occupation, the radical preacher Savonarola took over Florence. Claiming divine guidance, he proclaimed a theocracy that superseded the Pope's authority. He was famous for the so-called bonfire of the vanities, where he burned many of the aesthetic fruits of the Medici regime. While Savonarola initially had popular support, the more he surrendered to his inner voice, the more he alienated the public. He became increasingly tyrannical, claiming prophetic visions and the apostasy of the Church. The Pope excommunicated him, and when his premonitions proved untrue, he and his followers found themselves isolated, overthrown, and executed. After Savonarola, Florence's republic returned. This was the age in which Machiavelli came to prominence, writing The Prince in dedication to the Medici. After they returned to power, Florence eventually became a hereditary monarchy, with the Medici as its ruling house. They remained prominent in European politics, producing 4 popes, like Leo X, Lorenzo's son, and married into the French royal family. The Medicis eventually went extinct in the male line, their dynasty being subsumed into the House of Lorraine and the Habsburg monarchy. In all, the Medici have a remarkable tale in history. They grew wealthy by finance, dominated the politics of one of the world's major cultural centers, and became patrons of the arts and Renaissance. While they failed in a greater ambition of uniting Italy, They're remembered for their diplomacy and cultural legacy.